Sarah Dillard, at Dillard Sarah on Twitter, shared this tweet recently and it captured my attention. Doug Lemov expounded on the ideas in his book, Teach Like a Champion. Check him out. The ratio Sarah and Doug referenced is this proportion of cognitive work that the students do in the classroom. Consider the correlation chart at the bottom. How deep is the student thinking, and how many students are participating in that thinking? Out here is the goal, of course. We want high numbers of students participating in thinking that is rich and deep. That's a rigorous classroom. So let's take a look at two scenarios involving the participation ratio and the thinking ratio. In each of these scenarios, we're asking who is carrying the cognitive load, the students or the teacher. On the left side, we have an example of a classroom with high cognitive load. Conservatively, let's say 50% of the time is spent in deep thinking or high cognitive load, with 80% of those students engaged in that thinking during that time. On the right side, we have another class, 50% of the time spent carrying a cognitive load, and only 40% of those students engaged during that time. Next, you can see that we take 50% of the time spent in deep thinking and multiply it by 80% of the students engaged in that thinking to get a working yield of 40%. In the low cognitive classroom, 10% times 40% equals a working yield of 4%. If we take this even further, we can see that 180 days of a school year, let's scale this across, multiplied by 50 minutes per class period, yields 9,000 minutes per year, or 150 hours of one class period per year. This, of course, is assuming your individual class period equals 50 minutes. That may or may not be the case, and I understand most primary or elementary settings can vary in the amount of time spent on one subject. Given 150 hours of one class per year, we can multiply that number by the working yield and see a classroom with high cognitive load equals 60 hours of student work, but a classroom with low cognitive load yields only 6 hours of student work. And that's a total of 72 days spent in deep thinking versus 7.2 days spent in deep thinking. Wow. You can see how powerful this idea becomes when you scale across an entire school year. Sarah included this tweet, and it's so true. You may think, what classroom only has students working 10% of the time, or only 50% of the students working when it's their turn? That would be a madhouse. You can imagine how disruptive that must be. No. I think these classrooms can often give the appearance of learning. And upon a glance into those classrooms, even seasoned educators may confuse compliance with learning. Consider these examples. The class where the teacher is lecturing, providing instruction up front. The students are sitting passively at their desks. This teacher might be an excellent storyteller, in fact, and the students may genuinely sit quietly and listen. Or this may be the classroom where students are eagerly transcribing notes from a PowerPoint they're watching on the board. Or maybe it's the math class where students struggle to get started on independent work without teacher support or intervention. It could be the class where the teacher calls on one student at a time to check for understanding. There are a number of ways a low cognitive classroom can appear in our schools. I want to finish by drawing attention to high agency instructional models like Modern Classroom. Consider how powerful they can be when you apply the math behind these ratios. So even if a student in a high agency classroom wastes 50% of their time, they're still 100% engaged in deep thinking 50% of the time. That working yield is higher than the high classroom example we just provided. So credit to classrooms that are reconstructing themselves with learner-centered models that draw upon high agency approaches that allow students to make decisions about path, pace, and place. And I would challenge all of us to consider what deep thinking looks like and consider those strategies that increase the number of students engaged in high cognitive loads a greater percentage of time.